Hello and welcome to Byju's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. The Supreme Court has set aside an order of the RBI issued in 2018 that prohibited banks and cryptocurrency startups from providing services to virtual currencies or cryptocurrencies, or also known as digital currencies. So, in this context, first let us talk about cryptocurrencies before we look at this article. See, I have covered the topic of cryptocurrencies in detail through a video which is available on our YouTube channel. So I shall be sharing the link for this video in the description box below. So kindly go through this for a complete understanding. But over here, let's have a brief discussion on cryptocurrencies before we proceed to the article. See, cryptocurrencies are also referred to as digital or virtual currencies. Some of the popular examples include Bitcoin, Litecoin, Ethereum, etc. And the first cryptocurrency which was developed was Bitcoin, and it was developed by an individual or by a group using a pseudonym known as Satoshi Nakamoto. See, cryptocurrencies make use of peer-to-peer networking, and there are two features about cryptocurrencies that make them stand out as compared to our regular currencies. One, cryptocurrencies provide for decentralized control over the supply of cryptocurrencies and its transactions. And second, it makes use of very high level cryptography and encryption in order to secure the transactions. See, in order to understand the uniqueness of virtual currencies, first we need to understand how regular currencies function in the physical world. That is, we need to understand how physical currency is created, controlled, and regulated. In the physical world, we have a centralized economy wherein the central government and the central bank are responsible for creating, controlling, and regulating the legal tender, which is the currency we use for transactions. These two institutions have complete control over the creation of legal tender. They even regulate the supply of legal tender, and all the transactions that we carry out by using the legal tender is recorded in a ledger that is maintained by the banks, which in turn are monitored and regulated by the central bank. In fact, it is this centralized system of money supply which gives legitimacy to a government in the first place. But cryptocurrencies, on the other hand, have created a parallel economy that takes away control from the government and the central bank by providing for a decentralized system. In this system, any individual who is a part of the peer-to-peer network can become a part of the control and supply chain. In the world of cryptocurrencies, there is no central authority who is controlling and regulating the supply and transactions of cryptocurrencies. Instead, it is all the users who are a part of the peer-to-peer network who exercise control over the supply and transactions of cryptocurrencies. In this decentralized system, all the transactions are recorded by using a distributed ledger that is built upon blockchain technology. Instead of a centralized ledger that is maintained by the banks and monitored by the central bank, here we have a distributed ledger that is maintained by the peer-to-peer network. Such a distributed ledger system provides for greater transparency and reduces the possibility of fraud because each transaction has to be authenticated by all the members of the peer-to-peer network who are a part of the blockchain. Now the next concern is security. Since cryptocurrencies are traded in the virtual world, security is of utmost concern. Cryptocurrencies address this problem by adopting a very high level of cryptography and encryption. In fact, that's the reason why digital currencies are also known as cryptocurrencies, because they make use of very high level cryptography and encryption. This security feature has been applied at three different levels. It helps in controlling the creation of new currency units, it helps in securing the transactions, and it also helps in verifying the transactions. See, for example, the design of cryptocurrencies is such that a new cryptocurrency unit can be created by solving a complex algorithm. This technique of creating a new cryptocurrency unit is referred to as mining. So basically, in order to create a new cryptocurrency unit, through the technique of mining, you need to solve a complex mathematical problem that has been secured using a high-level encryption technique known as SHA-256. SHA stands for Secure Hash Function Algorithm. This is a high-level encryption algorithm that makes use of 256-bit encryption. So miners who are trying to solve the complex mathematical problem or algorithm, they need tremendous amounts of processing power. That is, they need to invest in expensive supercomputers which consume huge amounts of electricity. So in return for these massive investments, miners are rewarded with a new cryptocurrency unit that they can trade on the cryptocurrency markets. Similarly, strong cryptography and encryption techniques have been used to secure the transactions and even conceal the identity of the user and even to verify the transactions. So when cryptocurrencies were launched a few years ago, it generated a lot of excitement around the world due to its tremendous advantages. But it also generated a lot of fear amongst governments and central banks because of its disadvantages. The advantage of cryptocurrency is that it provides for a high degree of transparency, which is not available with your regular currencies. It provides for a high degree of security. It provides for anonymity to the user. And it also provides an investment opportunity to those who are looking to trade in cryptocurrencies. But the biggest disadvantage of cryptocurrency is that it cannot be effectively regulated as it operates in the virtual world. And its decentralized nature makes it nearly impossible for the government and the central banks to exercise control and their jurisdiction. So the lack of regulation combined with its anonymity creates a number of opportunities for the misuse of cryptocurrencies. Cryptocurrencies can be used to facilitate money laundering, terror financing, cybercrimes, and even drug trafficking. See, for example, in all the ransomware cyber attacks that we have seen of late, payments have been demanded in bitcoins. Similarly, drug peddlers and traffickers, they sell narcotics and even weapons in exchange for cryptocurrencies. So organized criminal groups have started to prefer the use of cryptocurrencies for their transactions because of its anonymity. This helps them to stay away from the reach of security and intelligence agencies. And another disadvantage of cryptocurrencies is that its price has remained very volatile over the last few years, and this price instability can affect the investors. The value of a cryptocurrency unit is determined by the demand-supply conditions in the market, and due to speculation and the negative sentiment of the government and the central banks against cryptocurrencies, there has been a lot of volatility in the market, and as a result, this price instability has affected investors. So due to these disadvantages, governments and central banks around the world have taken a consistent stand against cryptocurrencies. A few governments and central banks have completely banned cryptocurrencies, and some of them have tried to restrict and prohibit its usage. In the case of India, both the RBI and the government have taken a stand against cryptocurrencies, and they started warning the investors to stay away from cryptocurrencies. Because according to the RBI and the government, cryptocurrencies are not legal tender. Then in 2018, the RBI issued an order prohibiting all banks and cryptocurrency startups from providing services to virtual currencies. See, due to the worldwide excitement surrounding cryptocurrencies, a number of startups had come up which were providing digital wallet and trading services. But the RBI issued an order asking these startups to stop providing services to cryptocurrencies. This prohibition applied for banks as well, which were needed to provide for digital wallet services. But kindly remember, neither the government nor the RBI have till date officially banned cryptocurrencies in India. The government on its part established an interministerial committee in 2017 in order to suggest a way forward with regard to the prohibition and regulation of cryptocurrencies. This interministerial committee initially recommended the introduction of a bill known as the Crypto Token Regulation Bill of 2018 in order to regulate cryptocurrencies. Initially, this committee was against banning cryptocurrencies because it felt any such ban would be an extreme step which would stifle innovation and emerging technologies. Because as we discussed, cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology have tremendous advantages as well. And initially, the committee was in favor of promoting these technologies, but with strict regulation. But within a few months, the Interministerial Committee made a complete U-turn and it recommended a new bill known as the Banning Cryptocurrency and Regulation of Official Digital Currency Bill 2019. This bill was endorsed by the government as well. So this showed that the government was in favor of banning cryptocurrencies and it was looking to introduce an official digital currency which would be owned, controlled and regulated by the government and the RBI. But since then, no further action has been taken by the government and this draft bill is yet to be introduced in the parliament. So technically, cryptocurrencies have not been banned in India, and that's the reason why the Supreme Court has failed to see the logic or the reasoning behind this order of the RBI which was issued in 2018. The Supreme Court has said that the RBI has failed to establish how cryptocurrencies affect the regular economy. The Supreme Court has even questioned the government as to why it has not introduced a bill seeking to regulate cryptocurrencies. So due to the lack of a logical explanation by the RBI and the government, the Supreme Court has decided to set aside this order, and this is likely to enable banks and cryptocurrency startups to start providing services to cryptocurrencies. In another related article on page number 15, it has been reported that the Supreme Court's order might only provide temporary relief. See, this ruling of the Supreme Court has been welcomed by investors who have bought cryptocurrencies and even by businesses which provide cryptocurrency services. But the article says that this ruling of the Supreme Court might only provide a temporary relief to them because this might push the central government to introduce the draft law which is seeking to ban all privately held cryptocurrencies except for the proposed official digital currency which would be owned and controlled by the government and the RBI. Next, we have an editorial on page number 10 which refers to the decision of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights to approach the Supreme Court of India to be considered as an amicus curiae in the case against the Citizenship Amendment Act. But we have covered this topic in detail in our yesterday's analysis, so kindly go through the editorial once. This editorial is of the opinion that the decision of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights seems to be unwarranted. Because see, the United Nations and its institutions are essentially intergovernmental bodies. So this seems to be an overreach on the part of the OHCHR because it is seeking to become a part of the case against the Indian government. But the editorial also reminds the Indian government that it has a responsibility to clarify the concerns surrounding the Citizenship Amendment Act if it has to avoid such international criticism. Now let's take up a column from page number 10 which has been written by Rakesh Sood, who is a former Indian diplomat who has also served in Afghanistan. In this column, he evaluates the impact of the US-Taliban deal which was signed recently. This landmark deal is expected to bring the Afghan civil war to an end, and the key features of the deal have been discussed over the last 1 week. As a part of the deal, the United States has promised to reduce its troops from 14,000 to 8,600 in the coming 135 days, and it proposes to withdraw all American troops from Afghan soil by April 2021. The United States has also promised to remove the Taliban from the UN Security Council sanctions list, and it has committed itself to lift the sanctions that have been imposed against Taliban leaders. The United States has even promised to release all Taliban prisoners who have been held in American custody and as well as in the custody of the Afghan government. In return for these commitments made by the United States, the Taliban only has to release Afghan soldiers who have been held in its custody, and it has to enter into intra-Afghan talks with various political factions of Afghanistan. So as you can see, the deal is clearly one-sided, and it is Taliban which has emerged victorious. The United States could not even ensure that the Taliban renounces its violence and radicalism because the Taliban was negotiating from a position of strength. Whereas the United States was negotiating from a position of weakness, and it was desperate to exit the conflict and pull out all its troops in order to paint a good picture ahead of the presidential elections. This has led some experts to say that the terms of the deal shows that the US has lost the war because the US has failed to achieve its political and strategic objectives, which were stated by the US when it invaded Afghanistan in 2001. See, when the US invaded Afghanistan after the 9/11 attacks, its stated political and strategic objectives were to dismantle the terror safe havens that existed along the Af-Pak border, to eliminate terror groups such as Al Qaeda, which were responsible for the 9/11 attacks, to overthrow the Taliban government, which had sheltered various terror groups such as the Al Qaeda, and to stabilize Afghanistan in order to ensure the introduction of democracy and peace and stability in the interest of Afghan people. But as things stand today, we can clearly say that the US has failed to achieve all these objectives, and hence, few experts believe that the deal represents the defeat of the United States in the Afghan conflict. In this context, the writer refers to a popular statement that was made by former US Defense Secretary General Mattis, and he was of the opinion that the United States doesn't lose wars, but it only loses interest in these wars. The underlying point is that the United States enters into such long-term complicated conflicts, and when things turn unfavorable, and when it loses interest in the conflict, it doesn't hesitate to abandon its own goals and even its allies in the interest of working out a favorable exit. In fact, the same argument can be applied to the Vietnam War as well, and the writer says that there is a parallel between the US-Taliban deal and the manner in which the US signed a deal to end the Vietnam conflict. See, in the Vietnam War, which was fought between the 1960s and 1970s, the United States initially sought to support South Vietnam against North Vietnam, which in turn was supported by the Soviet Union and even by China. So the Vietnam War was essentially an extension of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Over the years, this conflict became extremely complicated, and as the war became unpopular back in the United States, the then US President Richard Nixon and his national security advisor Henry Kissinger, they sought a desperate exit from the Vietnam conflict. They desperately sought to bring back American troops and end US involvement in the Vietnam War in order to create a positive picture in the run-up to the presidential elections of 1972. So in order to work out this exit deal, the United States established a covert channel with China by using Pakistan as an ally. And finally, when the peace deal was struck, it became clear that the United States was abandoning not only its goals and ideals, but it was also abandoning its ally, that is South Vietnam. The Vietnam deal ended up favoring North Vietnam, which was in a position of strength, and left South Vietnam at the mercy of North Vietnam. And as expected, Richard Nixon went on to win the 1972 presidential elections, and Henry Kissinger was even awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for this deal. So the Vietnam example clearly illustrates the American approach to conflicts. The writer says that something similar has been done in the case of US-Taliban deal as well. As we saw, the terms of the deal clearly favors the Taliban, and the United States has abandoned its key allies in the Afghan conflict, that is the people of Afghanistan and the civilian government of Afghanistan. The deal ends up leaving both at the mercy of Taliban. Next, on page number 11, we have an infographic which illustrates the progress of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty towards nuclear disarmament. So in this context, let us talk about the NPT in detail and understand why India considers the NPT to be discriminatory. See, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was negotiated between 1965 and 1968 by the 18-Nation Committee on Disarmament, which is a UN-sponsored organization that is headquartered in Geneva. The main objective of these negotiations was to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and nuclear technology around the world. It also had the objective of promoting the peaceful usage of nuclear technology that is only for civilian applications such as power generation, cancer treatment, etc. And the third objective was to promote nuclear disarmament, that is to promote the disarmament of the nuclear arsenals of the nuclear weapon states. So, with these objectives in mind, the negotiations took place, and finally, the Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed in 1968 and it became effective from 1970 onwards. Now, let us talk about the key provisions of NPT. See, NPT recognizes only 5 countries as official nuclear weapon states. These countries are the P5, that is, the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. It includes the United States, France, United Kingdom, China, and of course, Russia. So, under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, only these 5 countries have been recognized as official nuclear weapon states. Because under the treaty, 1st January 1967 was selected as a cutoff date, and those countries which had developed and tested nuclear weapons before this cutoff date, only those countries would be recognized as official nuclear weapon states. So as you can see, the treaty does not recognize countries which developed nuclear weapons after this cutoff date, and hence no other country apart from the P5 would be recognized as official nuclear weapon states. So basically, the objective was to prevent the other countries from pursuing nuclear weapons in order to contain the proliferation of nuclear weapons and nuclear technology. So for countries other than the P5, if they have to sign the NPT, they should promise to never pursue nuclear weapons and they should give up any existing nuclear weapons program. So by signing the NPT, non-nuclear weapon states would essentially be giving up their nuclear ambitions, and in return, the P5, that is the nuclear weapon states, they would assist these non-nuclear weapon states in developing civilian nuclear technology. It is for this reason that countries such as India, Pakistan, and even Israel have never signed the NPT. Because according to India, the Non-Proliferation Treaty is discriminatory in nature because it restricts the strategic and nuclear ambitions of non-nuclear weapon states while allowing the P5 countries to retain their nuclear weapons. So India considered this provision as an assault on a country's sovereignty, and hence India has never signed the NPT. See, if you look at the countries that have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, all the countries in the world have signed the treaty except for these 4 countries. That is, India, Pakistan, Israel, and even South Sudan have never signed the NPT. Amongst these 4 countries, the case of South Sudan is different because South Sudan is a newly born country, and until recently, South Sudan did not have a stable government due to an ongoing civil war, and that's the reason why South Sudan has never signed the NPT. It's not that South Sudan has any nuclear ambitions. But on the other hand, India, Pakistan, and Israel have deliberately chosen not to sign the NPT because it restricts their nuclear ambitions. These 3 countries feel that developing nuclear weapons is a strategic need for their survival, and if they sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is discriminatory in nature, it would restrict this sovereign right. See, after the signing of the NPT, both India and Pakistan have went on to develop and even test nuclear weapons, and they have publicly announced their nuclear weapons program. But Israel, on the other hand, has deliberately kept its nuclear status ambiguous due to geopolitical tensions in the region, and it is a well-acknowledged open secret that Israel indeed possesses nuclear weapons even though it has never tested them. Then we have the case of North Korea and Iran. See, North Korea had initially signed the NPT, but later it went on to develop and test nuclear weapons, and it has become the only country to quit the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Then Iran, on the other hand, has signed the NPT and it continues to remain a part of the NPT. But Western countries, led by the United States, they suspect that Iran is developing a covert nuclear weapons program despite being a member of the NPT, and this is the root cause of tensions between US and Iran. Apart from these terms, the NPT also has the objective to promote nuclear disarmament and someday eliminate the entire nuclear arsenal of the P5 countries, that is the official nuclear weapon states. In this regard, the 5 nuclear weapon states have been working towards nuclear disarmament, and this infographic tracks their progress. See, between 1970 and early 2000, considerable progress has been made by these countries, especially the United States and the then Soviet Union, towards nuclear disarmament. But from 2010 onwards, the rate of disarmament has slowed down. When the Cold War was at its peak in the 1980s, there were around 70,000 plus nuclear warheads in the world. By 2019, the total number of nuclear warheads has been brought down to just 14,000 thanks to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But as mentioned, the rate of disarmament has slowed down, especially over the last 20 to 25 years. You can see in this infographic that the total number of warheads in the 1980s was at its highest. But between 1980s and 1990s, considerable reduction was achieved, especially by the United States and the Soviet Union. But over the last 20 to 25 years, the rate of reduction has considerably slowed down. As of today, Russia possesses the largest number of nuclear warheads, followed by the United States. And another important fact is that the United States, Russia, France, and UK have been reducing their nuclear stockpile. Whereas on the other hand, China, Pakistan, India, North Korea, and Israel, they have been consistently increasing their nuclear stockpile. Now let's take up an article from page number 13. India has informed a committee of the United Nations that it remains committed to the two-state solution that has been proposed and supported by the UN for resolving the conflict between Israel and Palestine. This UN committee has even called upon India to mediate and negotiate the conflict between Israel and Palestine. See, historically, India has always firmly supported the two-state solution, and it has consistently voted in favor of Palestine whenever the Israel-Palestine issue came up at any international institution. But of late, with the election of the Modi government, there has been a slight change in India's policy. There have been a few instances in the recent past where India has voted in favor of Israel. This is largely due to the growing strategic and ideological closeness between India and Israel. But despite this, the Modi government has shown that India remains committed to the two-state solution by voting consistently in favor of Palestine as well. It is this slight change in India's policy that led the UN committee to question India's commitment to the two-state solution. But the Indian government has informed the UN committee that India remains committed to the two-state solution for resolving the Israel-Palestine conflict. In order to understand the two-state solution and the Israel-Palestine conflict, kindly watch our video on India's relations with Israel, where I have covered both the topics in detail. I shall be sharing the link for this video in the description box below. Now let us take up the practice questions. What does QS World Rankings deal with? The correct answer is option C. It refers to the ranking of the top universities of the world. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 4. According to this article, IIT Bombay and IIT Delhi have been ranked amongst the world's top 50 technical institutions in the QS World University Ranking that has been published for 2020. Now let's take up the second question. Mizos are ethnically related to the Chins of Myanmar. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 12. See, the Mizos are native to Mizoram and they are ethnically related to the Chin ethnic group of Myanmar. According to this article, Mizo political groups have criticized Chakma leaders for writing a letter to the Prime Minister alleging that illegal migration and organized crime was rampant on the India-Myanmar border. Basically, this is an indirect reference by Chakmas that Mizos are engaging in illegal migration and organized crime along the India-Myanmar border by exploiting their connections with the Chins of Myanmar. The reason why there is rivalry and enmity between Mizos and Chakmas is because Chakmas are not native to Mizoram and they are Buddhist immigrants who have come from the Chittagong area of Bangladesh. On the account of facing religious persecution in Bangladesh, they fled to India as illegal migrants in order to seek refuge in India. Later, the Indian government has even granted them citizenship, and today, Chakmas are settled in a number of states of the northeast of India, including Mizoram. So the Mizos who are native to Mizoram see the Chakmas as infiltrators from Bangladesh and this is the root cause of rivalry between the two ethnic groups. Now let's take up the third practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India, IRDAI, is an autonomous statutory body tasked with regulating and promoting the insurance and reinsurance sectors in India. In ancient India, insurance was mentioned in the writings of Manu, who wrote the Manusmriti, Yagnavalkya, who wrote the Dharmashastra, and Kautilya, who wrote the Arthashastra. These writings examined the pooling of resources for redistribution after fire, floods, epidemics, and famine, and other such natural disasters. Both the statements are correct. Option C is the right answer. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 9. According to this article, the IRDAI, which is the regulator of the insurance sector, has directed the insurance companies and the hospitals to expedite the dispersal of insurance claims related to COVID-19. Now let's take up another practice question. With regard to India's indigenous defense production, what does Kaveri refer to? Option B is the correct answer. Kaveri refers to a jet engine that was being developed by the DRDO, which was supposed to power the Light Combat Aircraft or HAL Tejas. See, the LCA Tejas was supposed to be powered by the indigenously developed Kaveri engines. But due to the failure of this project, the LCA Tejas is currently being powered by GE engines that India has imported from the United States. But the DRDO is looking to revive the Kaveri jet engine project, and in a related article on page number 9, the government has informed the Indian Parliament that a total sum of 11,096 crore rupees has been spent on the indigenous development of the light combat aircraft and the Kaveri jet engine. Now let's take up another practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? Under the e-waste management rules, no role has been contemplated for state governments and local bodies. CFL lamps and other mercury-containing lamps have been excluded under the rules. Both the statements are incorrect. Option D is the right answer. See, under the e-waste management rules, state governments and local bodies have a very important role to play, and through recent amendments, even CFL lamps and mercury-containing lamps have been brought under the purview of the e-waste management rules. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 9. According to this article, the government has informed the Rajya Sabha that e-waste recycling has doubled in the country over the last 1 year. Now let's take up a map-based question. The term Great Wall of Sand, frequently in news, refers to China's land reclamation projects in the South China Sea. Option A is the right answer. Please look at this map. See, China, which claims nearly the entire exclusive economic zone of the South China Sea through its 9-dash line, has taken up a number of land reclamation projects across islands in the South China Sea in order to further strengthen its claims. This has led China into maritime disputes with a number of Southeast Asian countries, and as you can see in the map, there are 7 locations where China has taken up land reclamation projects. You can see in this image over here that by reclaiming land, China is trying to expand the area of these small islands, and it is trying to establish a permanent military presence in order to further its claims over the Spratly and Paracel Islands that are located in the South China Sea. The United States Department of Defense refers to these land reclamation projects of China as the Great Wall of Sand. This question has been asked because we have a related article on page number 9. According to this article, India's Army Chief, General Naravane, has referred to the changing nature of warfare. He has highlighted how China has changed the geostrategic realities of the South China Sea conflict without even firing a single shot through its land reclamation projects. Now let's take up a practice question from the 2017 prelims paper. Local self-government can be best explained as an exercise in democratic decentralization. Option B is the correct answer. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, illustrate why India considers the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons Treaty to be discriminatory. The second question, the Government of India and RBI have consistently opposed cryptocurrencies and are contemplating a ban. Is their stand justified? Kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.